That Saturday started like any other, just the kind of day I loved. Emma and I were planning a quiet barbecue in the backyard, nothing fancy. Just some steaks, a couple of beers, and a chance to slow down. We'd been married for over 7 years, and while things weren't perfect, I thought we were solid. Living in a small Colorado town near Pine Ridge Park, we'd built a comfortable life. It was simple, but it worked for us. Emma was setting up the table with one of those checkered tablecloths she liked, fussing with the dishes and humming to herself. I was firing up the grill, looking forward to the smoky smell of meat and the sizzle of the steaks. That's when I got the message. It was from my twin brother, Jake, and all it said was, "In town for a game. Let's hang." Jake and I hadn't seen each other in almost 2 years, but we'd always been close. I knew he'd pop back into my life whenever he could, dragging along his wild stories and easy charm. He was a professional athlete, a soccer player, which meant his life was as far from mine as you could get, where I was rooted in a daily routine. Emma, our house, my small tech business. Jake was out there traveling, dating, living large. Part of me envied him, I will not lie, but most days, I was happy to have chosen Emma and our life together. "Guess who's coming over?" I said, showing Emma the text. Her face lit up, and I could tell she was as excited as I was. She and Jake had always gotten along, maybe too well, with their shared interest in fitness and healthy living. Jake would always joke with me, calling me the settled-down twin or the family man, but it never bothered me. At least, not at first. A couple of hours later, Jake showed up, and as soon as he walked through the door, it felt like he was bringing in a storm. We hugged, and I could feel the strength in his grip, probably from all the time he spent working out. I laughed as he clapped me on the back, and for a moment, we were just 2 kids again. Even after so much time, Jake was still that magnetic guy who seemed to draw attention wherever he went. And, of course, he immediately started teasing me, asking if I had finally given up on getting in shape or if I was just going for the dad bod look. I rolled my eyes and laughed it off, but I saw Emma give him an amused look as she handed him a beer. Jake gave Emma one of his usual compliments, something like, "Emma, you're even more gorgeous than the last time I saw you." She blushed and laughed, brushing it off, but I saw the way she looked at him, just for a moment. I had always been proud to have Emma by my side. She was beautiful, smart, and had a smile that could light up a room. But something about the way she looked at Jake set off a tiny flicker of unease, a feeling I tried to ignore as I focused on getting the grill going. We settled into a rhythm, chatting and laughing as the steaks cooked. I kept glancing at Emma, who seemed unusually engaged, hanging on Jake's every word. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining it. They'd always been close, right? And Jake's charm was just his way, effortless, like he was born with it. But that flicker of unease kept growing, no matter how many times I told myself it was nothing. After a few beers, Jake leaned back, looking at me with a mischievous glint in his eye. "So, bro, do you ever miss the single life? Ever wonder what you missed out on?" He laughed as he said it, like it was just another one of his jokes, but I saw Emma's reaction, a quick, subtle glance at me, like she was curious about my answer. I shrugged, playing it cool. "Not really," I said. "I've got everything I need right here." I gave Emma a smile, trying to let her know that I meant it, that she was enough. She smiled back, but there was something in her eyes that unsettled me. Was she disappointed in my answer? Or was I just being paranoid? Then Jake brought up an old girlfriend we'd both known back in college. "Remember Anne?" he asked, smirking. "She somehow put up with both of us back then." He chuckled, and I couldn't help but laugh along, even though I felt Emma's eyes on me. She was quiet, watching, but I caught a hint of something. Curiosity, maybe? Or was it something else? Jake kept going, casually dropping stories from the past, details I hadn't thought about in years. I felt like he was dragging me back to a part of my life I'd left behind on purpose. When he laughed and added, "Man, we had some wild times," I felt Emma's gaze shift to me, her curiosity sharpened. It was a look I hadn't seen from her before, and it felt like we were treading into uncharted territory. There was a strange, subtle tension in the air, like something was waiting to happen. I tried to laugh it off, pouring myself another drink, but that uneasy feeling had settled deep, refusing to budge. I glanced at Emma, hoping for some sign of the familiarity we'd built, but her expression was unreadable. I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet, and I had no idea what was waiting on the other side. As the afternoon rolled on, the air around us shifted in a way I could not quite put my finger on. We had just refilled our drinks, Emma laughing at some joke Jake had made, and for a while, everything seemed normal. But every so often, I caught Emma giving Jake these sidelong glances, and each one felt like a small crack in the foundation I had always assumed was unshakable. At first, I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to the beer and nostalgia. I was probably imagining things. After all, it was just a friendly reunion, right? But as the conversation moved forward, that subtle tension only grew. Jake had this way of filling the air with his energy, and I could tell Emma was getting swept up in it. The funny thing was, I was used to Jake's presence being larger than life. I had always been the quieter twin, the one people usually forgot about in a crowd. Normally, I was fine with that, but this time, something felt different. The conversation veered toward old stories, mostly harmless memories. Jake started talking about his last trip to Miami, throwing in details about late nights and random flings, as if he was showing us the freedom we'd given up by choosing that settled life. I was starting to get uncomfortable, but Emma looked at him with an intensity that unsettled me. She laughed at his stories in a way that felt more than polite, like she was genuinely fascinated by this version of life she had left behind. I knew she had been the adventurous type in her younger days, but we had settled down, or at least, I thought we had. At some point, Jake leaned forward, giving Emma that infamous grin of his. "You know, Em," he said, his tone casual but his words sharp, "I always wondered if Sam here ever showed you his wild side. He had one back in the day, you know." Emma's eyes sparkled with mischief as she turned to me. "Oh, did he?" she asked, her voice playful, but there was something else in her tone, something I could not quite place. I cleared my throat, feeling an unexpected flush of embarrassment. "Come on, Jake," I muttered, trying to laugh it off. "Those days are way behind me." But even as I said it, I could feel Emma's gaze on me, searching, as if trying to unearth some part of me she hadn't seen before. Jake smirked, leaning back and taking a long sip of his beer. "Well, maybe that's the problem," he said, his tone light but his words carrying a strange weight. "You know, sometimes it's good to shake things up, remind yourself of what life's all about." Emma laughed again, but there was a hint of something almost challenging in her eyes as she looked at me. It was as if she was silently asking me if Jake was right, if maybe I had lost a part of myself somewhere along the way. I tried to laugh it off, but the truth was, a part of me did wonder if I had settled too comfortably into the routine, if I had left that side of myself behind. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was seeing myself through Emma's eyes, and maybe I didn't like what I saw. When the sun started to dip below the horizon, Emma announced she was going to take a shower before we settled in for the evening. She gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and as she walked away, I noticed Jake watching her with a look that made my stomach twist. It wasn't blatant, just a quick glance, but it was enough to send my mind racing. Once she was inside, Jake looked over at me with a smirk. "You're a lucky guy. You know that?" he said, raising his beer. I forced a laugh, trying to shrug it off. "Yeah, I know," I replied, but the words felt hollow. Jake's words sat between us like an accusation, and for a moment, I felt like he was daring me to question the boundaries of my marriage. When Emma came back out, freshly showered and dressed in a simple tank top and shorts, I felt an odd tension rise again. I hadn't noticed her get up at first, but with Jake's eyes on her, I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. She looked beautiful, but there was something different about the way she carried herself, like she was aware of the extra attention. I felt a weird mixture of pride and discomfort. Emma joined us again, sitting close to me, but her gaze kept wandering to Jake, like she was caught up in some gravitational pull I couldn't understand. And then, without warning, Jake took a bold step forward in the conversation that changed the entire tone of the night. "So, do you two ever talk about spicing things up?" he asked, his tone casual, but his words felt anything but. I looked at him, startled, unsure if I'd heard him right. Emma's expression shifted, a glint of curiosity sparking in her eyes as she looked between us. "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her tone far too interested for my liking. Jake shrugged, his expression calm, as if he was talking about the weather. You know, trying new things, bringing a little adventure back into the bedroom. People do it all the time, he said, glancing at me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. I felt a jolt of discomfort, a twist of something I couldn't quite name. I was torn between laughing it off and shutting him down, but before I could say anything, Emma leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Jake. Is that something you've done? She asked, her voice soft, almost too soft. Jake chuckled, giving her a wink. Maybe, he said, his tone smooth and confident. Life's too short not to, you know? And there it was. A line had been crossed, subtle yet undeniable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. I watched them, the two people closest to me, and realized I wasn't as comfortable with this conversation as I'd pretended to be. Something deep inside me sensed that, in one way or another, I was in over my head. The air felt thick with something I could not quite define, like we were all dancing around an invisible line, each of us testing the limits. I kept telling myself I was just overthinking it, that Jake was being his usual self, pushing boundaries, stirring things up. He had always been like that, the one who thrived on making people squirm. But this was different. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was looking at Jake with a curiosity that felt dangerous. The kind that makes you wonder just how well you know the person you share a bed with. We fell into an uneasy silence for a while, each of us sipping on our drinks and pretending that Jake's suggestion had not stirred something. Emma was watching him intently, though, as if waiting for him to say something more. Part of me wanted to pull her aside, to ask what was going on in her head, but a strange mix of pride and insecurity kept me quiet. I did not want to come off as insecure in front of Jake or Emma, so I stayed still, pretending I was cool with this whole unsettling exchange. It was Emma who finally broke the silence. So, Jake, she began, her tone casual, how do you find time to keep things interesting with the kind of schedule you have? Jake smirked, leaning back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention. Oh, it is not that hard. When you want something bad enough, you make time, he replied, his voice low and confident. He looked straight at her as he spoke, and I felt my stomach twist, a pang of something close to jealousy creeping in. Emma nodded, as if deep in thought, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. It was as if she was weighing the possibility of something, exploring an idea she had never considered before. And Jake, being Jake, was more than willing to play along, pushing boundaries in his own subtle way. I felt like I was on the outside looking in, watching something unfold that I did not want to be a part of, yet somehow could not avoid. Emma laughed softly, glancing between Jake and me, and for the first time, I felt a genuine flicker of fear. A small, insidious thought crept into my mind. What if Emma was genuinely interested in whatever Jake was hinting at? I shook it off, trying to remind myself that this was just idle talk, but the way she looked at him, there was no denying the intrigue in her eyes. She was engaged, fully and openly, in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I felt a knot of unease tighten in my chest. Jake, seeing her interest, leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze steady. I'm just saying, guys, sometimes you have to shake things up. It's easy to get comfortable, to lose that spark without even realizing it. He looked directly at me as he said it, a challenge in his eyes that made me feel like I had something to prove. I forced a laugh, trying to keep things light. Well, Jake, maybe some of us are happy without having to shake things up all the time. Emma turned to me, her expression thoughtful. But don't you ever wonder if there's more? I mean, we all get into routines, don't we? Her words struck a nerve, one I hadn't known was even there. She looked at me with a kind of intensity, like she was waiting for me to say something to reassure her, or maybe to challenge her. I felt my face flush, and for a moment, I was genuinely at a loss for words. Emma, we've built a good life. I finally managed, my voice sounding too defensive, even to my own ears. A stable, happy life. Isn't that what matters? Jake chuckled, shaking his head. Come on, Sam. Life's short. Stability's great and all, but you don't want to look back and think you missed out on something, right? I hated that he was undermining everything I believed in, and I hated even more that Emma seemed to be buying into it. She glanced at Jake, then back at me, her eyes reflecting a conflict I could not quite understand. It was as if she was seeing me through new eyes, reevaluating me in light of Jake's words. I felt like I was slowly losing control, like I was slipping away from a version of my life I had worked so hard to build. Then Emma's face softened, and she gave me a small smile, almost as if to reassure me. "It's okay, Sam," she said gently. "We're just talking. It's just interesting to think about." But I knew it was more than that. We had crossed an invisible line, one that you cannot uncross. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the strange ache of knowing something fundamental had shifted between us. Part of me wanted to ask her outright if she was serious, if she was truly considering what Jake was putting out there, but I was afraid of what her answer might be. The three of us sat there, each of us lost in our own thoughts, the silence stretching thin. Finally, Jake stretched and stood up, breaking the tension with a lazy grin. "Well, I think I'll hit the sack. Big game tomorrow." Emma and I followed him to the door, watching as he headed toward the guest room, whistling to himself. When the door clicked shut, Emma turned to me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words would not come. I wanted to ask her if she really believed Jake's nonsense, if she truly felt there was something missing in our life together. But instead, I just put an arm around her, pulling her close, hoping that would be enough. She leaned into me, resting her head against my shoulder, and for a brief second, I felt the familiar comfort of us. But even as I held her, I could feel the ghost of the conversation lingering, a silent question hanging in the air. As we headed to bed, the warmth of her body beside me felt strangely distant, and I knew then that whatever had been stirred up tonight was not going away. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come, but the unease gnawed at me. I knew, deep down, that we had ventured into uncharted territory, and the way back was nowhere in sight. That night, sleep was elusive. Emma lay beside me, her breaths soft and steady, slipping into dreams while my mind spun in every direction. I tried to close my eyes and let it go, to let the conversation with Jake fade, but it clung to me like a burr. Jake's words, his easy confidence as he spoke about spicing things up, and, worst of all, Emma's intense curiosity had lit a slow-burning fire of doubt inside me. Lying there in the dark, I kept replaying everything that had happened, every look and laugh, every loaded word. I tried to convince myself it was all just a joke, that I was the one blowing things out of proportion. But the way Emma looked at Jake, I couldn't shake it. I started wondering if maybe she did feel trapped in this settled life we had created, if she missed some part of herself I hadn't noticed slipping away. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. Had I missed something important? I thought back to the early years with Emma, when everything felt new and thrilling, when we could spend hours talking, laughing, dreaming together. Somewhere along the way, routine had taken over. There was comfort in that routine, sure, but maybe I'd let things grow too predictable. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by vague dreams that left me feeling worse by morning. Emma was up early, moving through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, her face bright and unreadable as she made coffee. She hummed softly, a tune I didn't recognize. I wanted to reach out to her, to pull her close and ask her if we were okay, if last night's conversation had really been nothing but idle talk. "Morning," she said, handing me a steaming mug. Her eyes met mine for a brief second, but there was a distance in her gaze, like a piece of herself was somewhere else. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. "Sleep well?" She nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "Yeah, I did. You?" I shrugged, not sure if I should say what was on my mind. "Not really. Couldn't stop thinking about some of the stuff Jake said last night. Got me wondering." She paused, lowering her mug and looking at me intently. "Wondering about what?" I struggled to find the right words, feeling a knot in my throat. "I mean, are you happy, Em? With everything with us?" I tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin. Last night's conversation. It just got me thinking. Her face softened, and she reached out to squeeze my hand. Oh, Sam. Of course, I'm happy. We have a good life together. But, I prompted, feeling my heart pound. Emma looked down at her coffee, her brow furrowing slightly. I mean, don't you ever feel like we're in a bit of a routine? Not that it's a bad thing, she added quickly. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if there's more, you know? I nodded, swallowing hard, not sure what to say. Hearing her admit it made me feel like my worst fears were coming true, that I was not enough, that somehow Jake had unearthed a part of Emma I couldn't reach. Our conversation ended there as Jake strolled into the kitchen, looking fresh and completely oblivious to the tension hanging in the room. Morning, lovebirds, he said, grinning as he poured himself a coffee. Emma's mood shifted instantly. She greeted him with a bright smile, and they fell into easy conversation, talking about his game and his latest adventures. I watched them, feeling like an outsider, wondering if Emma was more captivated by Jake's freedom than I'd allowed myself to believe. After breakfast, Jake left to prep for his game, and I suggested to Emma that we go for a walk. I needed some time alone with her, away from Jake's larger-than-life presence, to clear the air. She agreed, and we walked in silence for a while, the crisp morning air doing little to cool the unease simmering between us. Finally, I took a deep breath, breaking the silence. Emma, last night, did it really mean anything to you? Or was it just Jake being Jake? She glanced at me, her eyes searching, as if debating how much to say. Sam, I don't want you to get the wrong idea, she said carefully. It was just a conversation. But, I'll admit it was interesting to think about. She paused, biting her lip. I mean, it's only natural to wonder, right? About what we could have done differently, or if there's something more we could explore. Her words struck me like a punch to the gut. There it was, laid bare. The thought had crossed her mind. She had entertained the idea, however briefly, of something more. I tried to hide my hurt, but I felt like I was drowning in a wave of doubt and insecurity. Emma, I said quietly, I love the life we've built together. I don't want to lose that, or you. She looked at me with a sad smile, reaching up to touch my face. Sam, I love you too. But maybe we're both just a little curious. Her words hung in the air, settling like a weight on my chest. I didn't know what to say, and as we walked back to the house, a silence fell between us that felt thicker and heavier than before. I had always thought of our marriage as unbreakable, a constant in a world that was ever-changing. But now, for the first time, I was starting to wonder if I had been fooling myself all along. When we got back, Jake was lounging on the couch, flipping through a magazine like he hadn't a care in the world. I felt a flash of irritation. He had stirred up this turmoil between Emma and me, yet he got to walk away without a second thought. Meanwhile, I was left here, struggling to understand where my marriage stood, wondering if we were on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. As I sat down beside Emma, I couldn't shake the sense that I was losing her, one small step at a time. And worst of all, I didn't know how to stop it. That walk with Emma stayed with me, the raw honesty of her words looping through my mind in the hours that followed. I wanted to believe she was just curious and that curiosity was harmless. But curiosity can grow into something more, especially when Jake is around. With his magnetic pull and boundless confidence, the house felt tense. Every interaction felt loaded, like we were all navigating around a spark waiting to catch fire. Jake was still there, oblivious or maybe unconcerned about the turmoil he'd stirred up. He was sprawled out on the couch, talking about the game he had that evening and the party afterward. He invited us both, his face lighting up as he described the wild crowd expected. Emma's eyes lit up too, the spark of excitement unmistakable. She had always loved socializing, and lately, it seemed like she was longing for a little more of it. Come on, Sam, Jake teased. Let Emma have a little fun. What's one night? Emma looked at me, hopeful but cautious, as if she were holding her breath for my answer. A part of me wanted to say no, to turn down the invitation and reclaim our safe, private life. But there was something else gnawing at me, an old insecurity I couldn't quite shake. I didn't want to be the husband who held her back. I didn't want to be the man afraid of stepping out of his comfort zone, especially when my wife was starting to look at that comfort zone like a cage. So I forced a smile and said, "Sure, let's go." The relief and excitement in Emma's face only tightened the knot in my stomach. The night at the game was a blur of noise and energy. Jake was in his element, laughing and chatting with fans, tossing a playful wink to Emma here and there. And she was thriving. I watched her light up, eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in a while. She clapped and cheered with the crowd, her voice mingling with the roar around us, her attention fixed on Jake. I sat beside her, feeling like I was watching her slip away in real time. By the time we reached the after-party, I was already exhausted. The noise, the lights, the crowd. All of it was overwhelming, but Emma seemed energized. She mingled easily, laughing and chatting with Jake's friends, her laugh ringing out over the music. I tried to keep up, to join in, but I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, out of sync with the woman I had shared my life with. At some point in the night, I noticed her sitting with Jake on one of the lounge couches, leaning in close as they talked. I watched them from a distance, torn between giving her space and fighting the jealousy bubbling up inside me. Jake was leaning in too, his arm casually draped over the back of the couch, and Emma was laughing, her hand lightly touching his arm as she spoke. It was an innocent gesture, maybe, but the look on her face was different. She looked alive, different than when we were alone together. Eventually, I walked over, trying to mask the unease twisting inside me. "Mind if I join you two?" I asked, forcing a smile. Emma turned to me, her eyes bright. "Of course not," she said, scooting over to make room. But the energy between her and Jake felt unbreakable, like I was intruding on something I didn't fully understand. Jake took a long sip of his drink, then grinned. "Sam, you need to relax. Come on, have another drink with us." He clinked his glass against mine, and Emma gave me an encouraging look. I nodded, trying to swallow the doubt that kept surfacing. The rest of the night was a strange dance of pretending I belonged there, laughing along with Jake's stories, clinking glasses whenever a toast was made. But in the back of my mind, I felt like I was holding onto something fragile, something slipping further away each time Emma glanced Jake's way. When we finally left the party, Emma was glowing with happiness, her laughter echoing through the parking lot as we walked back to the car. Jake trailed behind us, a satisfied smile on his face, like he'd orchestrated the whole night. I held Emma's hand tightly, but the warmth between us felt distant, like she was caught up in something I couldn't reach. In the car, Emma was quiet, lost in thought, a soft smile lingering on her lips. I wanted to ask her what she was thinking, but I was afraid of the answer. The silence stretched, and I could feel the weight of all the things left unsaid pressing down on me. When we got home, Emma turned to me with a soft smile. "Thanks for tonight, Sam. It was nice to do something different." I nodded, feeling that familiar pang of fear rise up again. "Yeah, I'm glad you had a good time." She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and headed upstairs, leaving me alone in the entryway. I stayed there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, wondering if I'd just taken a step I couldn't undo. By the time I climbed into bed beside her, she was already asleep, her breathing deep and even. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the night replaying in my mind like a bad dream. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close, to remind her of what we had. But some instinct held me back, a fear that if I reached out, she might pull away for good. As the hours dragged on, I felt myself drifting further from the woman I loved. She was lying right there, inches away, but there was a distance between us that felt like a canyon. And I knew, deep down, that if I didn't find a way to bridge that gap, I was going to lose her. For the first time, I understood what Jake had meant about missing out. But I wasn't missing out on some grand adventure or thrill. I was losing Emma, one subtle shift at a time, and I didn't know how to bring her back. The fear of that realization sank into my bones, and I knew that my life, our life, was balancing on a precipice, teetering between the familiar and something unknown that I wasn't ready for. Sunday morning, I woke to find the other side of the bed empty. Emma was already downstairs, I guessed, and I lay there for a moment, letting the silence sink in. My mind was still tangled with last night's memories, the laughter, the glances, the look in her eyes as she watched Jake. It all left me feeling raw, unsettled. I pulled myself out of bed, hoping to shake off the thoughts clawing at me. But as soon as I entered the kitchen, I could feel it, that strange, unspoken distance. Emma was there, sipping her coffee, her expression unreadable. She looked up and smiled, but it felt thin, almost practiced. "Morning," I said, reaching for my own cup. "Good morning," she replied, her tone light, casual, like nothing had changed. But I knew it had. The air between us felt weighted, charged with something I didn't know how to address. We went through the motions of breakfast, making small talk that barely scratched the surface of what was really on our minds. Jake wasn't around. He'd left early for some gym session, apparently, and the silence in the house without him felt almost eerie. Finally, as we cleaned up the dishes, I couldn't take it anymore. "Emma, can we talk about last night?" She paused, her hands stilling on a dish towel. "Sure," she said, but there was a hesitation in her eyes. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "It's just, I don't know. I feel like something shifted. You and Jake were close last night. Maybe too close?" Her brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't look angry, just guarded. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you two were having a great time. You seemed really into it." Into him. I tried to keep my voice calm, but the vulnerability leaked through. I didn't want to sound possessive or insecure, but my mind was swimming in 1,000 doubts I couldn't silence. Emma looked away, exhaling slowly before she answered. "Sam, it was just a fun night. That's all. Jake's fun to be around, and yes, I enjoyed myself. But that doesn't mean anything's wrong with us, doesn't it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because it feels like something's changed between us. Like you're slipping away." She flinched at that, her face softening, and for a second, I thought I'd gotten through to her. But then she shook her head, as if brushing off whatever emotion had crept in. "I'm not slipping away, Sam," she said gently. "I love you. This is just us exploring new things, right? Isn't that what we agreed to? You said you were okay with going out, having fun, trying something different." I swallowed hard, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. She was right. I had agreed to try new things, to let her have the freedom she seemed to need. But I hadn't realized how much it would shake me, how much it would make me question everything I'd thought was solid in our life together. Just then, the door opened, and Jake walked in, carrying a couple of takeout coffees and a bag of pastries. "Morning, you too," he said with a grin, oblivious to the tension lingering in the air. Emma's face lit up, and she moved to greet him, leaving me standing there, my thoughts scattered. I watched her laugh at something he said, the easy way she fell into conversation with him. And it hit me again, that feeling that I was on the outside, looking in. Jake turned to me, giving me a light punch on the shoulder. "So, Sam," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "What did you think of last night? Good times, huh?" I forced a smile, but the words stuck in my throat. "Yeah, it was something, all right." Jake's grin widened. "We should do it again sometime. You know, live a little. It doesn't hurt to shake things up, right?" I couldn't tell if he was teasing me or if he genuinely didn't see the effect he was having on my marriage. I glanced at Emma, who was watching us with a half-smile, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite decipher. My heart sank as I realized that, in a way, Jake had already started shaking things up more than I'd ever anticipated. The day stretched on, the three of us hovering around the house, a strange tension simmering beneath the surface. Every time I caught Emma and Jake sharing a glance or a laugh, the knot in my stomach tightened. I wanted to pull her aside, to have an honest conversation, but I didn't know how to approach it without sounding desperate, without pushing her further away. By late afternoon, Jake announced he was heading out to meet a friend and wouldn't be back until late. He winked at Emma before he left, a casual gesture, but it sent a wave of unease through me. As soon as the door closed behind him, I turned to Emma, my heart pounding. "Emma, we need to talk." "Really talk," I said, unable to hold back any longer. She looked at me, her eyes soft but guarded. "Okay, I'm listening." I struggled to put my thoughts into words, the fear clawing at my insides. Emma, are you happy? With us? With this? Because I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't know how to stop it. Her face softened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to tell me everything would be okay, that we'd find our way back. But instead, she reached out, squeezing my hand. Her eyes filled with a strange sadness. Sam, I don't know. I think I am happy. But maybe I've been wondering too. Wondering if there's more to experience, if we've settled too much. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I had always been her safe place, the one she could rely on. But now it seemed like that security was no longer enough. She was searching for something I couldn't give her, something I didn't know if I could even understand. As the evening crept on, a silence grew between us, heavy and unresolved. I lay awake that night, the darkness pressing in around me, the distance between us growing wider, unbridgeable. And as I lay there, I realized that I was on the verge of losing her to a world I couldn't follow, a world where Jake's influence loomed larger than I'd ever imagined. Heavier with every passing day, Jake's presence lingered even when he wasn't around, like an invisible thread that had woven itself into the fabric of our marriage, tightening until it hurt. I could see it in Emma's eyes. Some part of her had been awakened, and as much as I wanted to pull her back, I was starting to realize that maybe I couldn't. Maybe she was already too far gone. I thought about everything I'd wanted for us, the life we'd built, the years we'd shared. And yet here we were, teetering on a precipice, with Jake as the catalyst, daring us to take a leap I wasn't sure we'd survive. It was Friday night when everything came to a head. We had barely spoken all week, a polite distance settling in as we went through the motions. I couldn't tell if she was avoiding me, or if I was the one keeping her at arm's length, afraid to confront what was happening between us. But I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my own doubts, couldn't keep wondering if my wife was slipping through my fingers. That night, as Emma was getting ready for bed, I finally mustered the courage to speak. I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting, my heart pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. Emma, I began, my voice barely steady. I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm losing you, like I don't even know where we stand anymore. She looked up, surprised, and I could see the tension in her face, the weight of something she'd been holding back. She sat down beside me, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. Sam, she said quietly, her voice laced with a sadness I hadn't heard before. I never meant for things to feel this way. I never wanted to hurt you. But you have, I whispered, the truth of it hitting me like a wave. I feel like I'm not enough for you anymore. Like maybe you're looking for something I can't give you. Emma closed her eyes, as if bracing herself, and when she opened them, I could see the resolve in her gaze. It's not that you're not enough, Sam. You are. But there's a part of me that's been wondering, questioning if this life is all there is. I felt a surge of anger and desperation. And Jake? Is he the answer to that question? Her expression flickered, and for a moment, I saw the truth, the pull she felt, the confusion in her heart. But she looked away, shaking her head. It's not about him. This has nothing to do with Jake. It's about me, about us, about wanting more, feeling more. Emma, I've given you everything I have, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid. But now I don't even know if you want to be here with me. She reached out, her hand covering mine, her touch familiar yet distant. I do want to be here. I feel trapped, Sam. Like I've settled into a role, a life that I didn't fully choose. Her words sliced through me, and I pulled my hand away, feeling like I just lost something I couldn't get back. So what does that mean? Are we over? Are you leaving? She hesitated, and that hesitation felt like the answer I feared most. But then, she shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I don't want to leave. I love you, Sam, but I need time to figure out what I want, who I am. The silence between us was deafening, and I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for something that would never come. She wasn't going to choose. Not yet. She was torn between two worlds, one where we had built a life together, and another where she was free to explore whatever it was Jake had stirred up in her. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up, feeling an emptiness settle over me. I can't keep waiting, Emma. I deserve to be with someone who wants me, who's sure about us. Her face crumpled, tears filling her eyes as she reached out for me, but I took a step back, shaking my head. Maybe you'll find what you're looking for, I said quietly. But if you need space, maybe I need some too. With that, I left the room, my heart breaking with every step. I walked out into the night, the air cold and biting, the weight of everything crashing down around me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the life I'd known crumbling beneath me. In the days that followed, we kept our distance, neither of us sure how to bridge the divide. Jake came by a few times, but I couldn't stand to be around him, couldn't look at him without feeling the rage simmering beneath the surface. I told Emma I needed to get away for a while, to clear my head, to figure out what I wanted, if there was anything left to fight for. The night I left, she hugged me tightly, and for a moment, I almost stayed. But the doubt in her eyes reminded me that I couldn't keep holding on to someone who wasn't sure they wanted to be held. So I walked away, the weight of my love for her and the pain of her uncertainty pressing down on me. As I drove away, I realized that the life we had was gone, replaced by something fragile and unknown. I didn't know if we'd find our way back, or if we were both destined to find separate paths. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep waiting in the shadows, hoping she'd come back to me. And in that moment, as I left the familiar behind, I felt the first flicker of freedom, a small, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd find my own way forward, with or without her.